At TD, our support doesn't stop after Pride. Year-round, we support organizations working to overcome obstacles to health and wellness because our drive for positive change never stops.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Thompson. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm a mentor of Talent Advisory for the Vancouver office.
Hi, I'm Yasmin Mohandisi. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Records Management Coordinator in our Vancouver office.
Hi, my name is Justin Kahn, pronouns he, him, and I'm our Canada Manager of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. I'm also our National Co-Chair of GLOW Canada, our 2S LGBTQ+ affinity group. As a global law firm, it's important for us to continue to support 2S LGBTQ+ communities. It's also vital for us to support community organizations here in Canada.
Dentist is pleased to be able to sponsor Vancouver Pride Society Queer History Panel.
And we're wishing you all a very happy and safe Pride.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is Vancouver Pride Society's 4th annual Queer History Panel. And I am joined by the amazing Harmony, Carmel, Nancy, and Vanessa. Before we get going here, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement. We are on the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. In terms of land acknowledgement and recognition, I think it's really important to acknowledge ourselves relationally to the land and our ongoing roles in decolonization and colonization and showing up for and supporting Indigenous folks. So thank you for being here. I'm gonna get right to it. I'm gonna introduce all of these fine folks. First, I will introduce myself. My name is Fanny Kierce, and like I just mentioned relationally, I'm gonna introduce myself relationally. So I am the daughter of Cindy and Tim. I am the future wife of Jen. I'm the dog mother of Sullivan. I am a poet and a storyteller. And I am a Black, Jewish, Sapphic settler who is working toward land and relational justice. And to my right is the beautiful Carmel Tanaka. And Carmel is the founder and executive director of JQT Vancouver and the curator of the BC Jewish Queer and Trans Oral History Project and the Jewpanese Project. And the Jewpanese Project can be found on Instagram. Thank you, Carmel, for being here. And to Carmel's right is Harmony. Harmony is a queer, pansexual, poly, sober, disabled Filipino woman who uses she, her pronouns. Through Let's Live, Educate, Transform Society, formerly creating accessible neighborhoods, CAN, she began her current work as a disability justice advocate and educator, who co-facilitates workshops on disability justice, the activism movement to combat ableism, and she is also a researcher and co-facilitator of workshops on the queer and trans history of BC and Canada, including a newly developed queer and trans history trivia game. We all must play. She has co-created 2 new workshops on neurodiversity with a fellow neurodivergent community member. In 2022, Harmony was part of the cross-cultural walking tours through JQT Vancouver, where she was a tour guide who shared intersectional queer and Asian queer history, was part of a group of self-advocates and disability organizations that created a festival where they connected people with disabilities with sexual health resources. She has volunteered with multiple Pride organizations, including creating a youth stage during the 2022 New Westminster Pride celebrations and assisting Let's with the accessibility audit for Vancouver Pride's 2023 season. She was a keynote speaker for her role in Mainland Community's 2023 National Accessibility Week celebration dialogue on creating inclusive communities. She works in harm reduction as a sober buddy at drag and dance parties, providing safe sex and safe drug supplies. Harmony was awarded the title of Beacon by currently reigning Empress Carmela Brell for her allyship work within community spaces. Thank you for being here, Harmony.
Thank you.
And to my left is Nancy Lee. Nancy Lee is a Taiwanese-Canadian interdisciplinary media artist, curator, DJ, and cultural producer. Their work stimulates and enlivens spaces, making a provocative statement about how inescapability interconnected we are with our surroundings. This notion of choreography is a constant in Nancy's work and underpins their projects from their early work as a filmmaker through their conception of live events and into the realms of XR, new media performance and installation, where their art practice continues to coalesce and evolve. Nancy co-founded Current, an intersectional and multidisciplinary initiative featuring artistic and educational programming. Nancy's interdisciplinary works have been presented at Cannes Film Festival, SXSW, MUTEC, Center Fee, VIF, Berlin International Film Festival, Vancouver International Jazz Festival, and more. They are an XR instructor at IM4 Media Lab and artistic mentor at Festival of Record Movement. They also run a DIY studio in Vancouver, Chinatown, hosting cross-genre shows, workshops, and residencies. As a Sundance Institute New Frontier alumni, Nancy is participating in the Stratosphere Dome Theatre Residency at Society of Arts and Technology in Montreal with Kieran Bummer for their speculative sci-fi project, Union. Thank you for being here, Nancy. And last but not least on our beautiful panel is Vanessa Terra. Originally from Montreal, Vanessa has lived in Vancouver since 1995. A librarian for over 25 years, as well as a writer, she is a trans woman of both Caribbean and Italian ancestry. Outside of her career, Vanessa has, over the years, volunteered with CITR Radio at UBC, a community garden society in East Vancouver, and currently volunteers with the Vancouver Black Library. Thank you each for being here. Okay, so we're just gonna keep rolling right along. I would just like to pose this question to the group. So in relation to being here and present in so-called Vancouver, what has it been like to own your queer identity? Which is a big umbrella question.
Who wants to start?
Carmel, I can feel like you're like, do I make the segue?
Sure, I can start it off, although I was seeing if anyone else wanted to start. So what does it mean to own identity? I mean, for probably a lot of us around the table, it's evolved over time how we identify. I am Jewish, and I'm Japanese Canadian, and I'm queer, and I'm neurodivergent. I'm all of these things. And it largely depends on, my level of safety, how I disclose my identity, where I am, what country I'm in, who I'm with. Currently right now, I am around a panel and with a team that's super, super inclusive, as well as an audience that will be listening in. There was a time when I used to say I was half Japanese Canadian, not always disclosing that I was half Jewish for safety reasons. But I no longer use fractions because I don't sing my Shabbat blessing at 50% every Friday. I don't roll my sushi at 50%. I don't create art or make love at 50% either. And so I am fully all of these things. And maybe ask me this question another 20 years.
Yeah.
Passing the puck to Vanessa.
That's something that's taken time for me as well as to, growing up, I think it was often a bit of a struggle between myself and both my heritages and other factors. And I think in the past, I'd say 10, 12 years, I started transitioning at 40. And so being able to kind of reintegrate all of these different identities has taken a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of waiting too. But I'm looking at it more as 100% as opposed to 25% and 50% and 3.4% and all that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to intersectional identity, like Carmel said, it's been very difficult to always have this kind of thing that othered me from other people. I grew up in Langley, which is very white. I think we were the only Filipino family in Fort Langley. So kind of always facing this idea that I'm not white enough for white people and also not Filipino enough to be considered Filipino, and having like a really loose connection with my ethnicity, because my dad is Filipino, my mom is white settler, and all of his family is in Philippines. So we would correspond via letters, but I didn't eat the food. I didn't enjoy the customs. I didn't like know the language. And then closeting myself within like a Langley structure was a safety move for sure. So when it comes down to intersectionality of being like this person of color, of being queer, of being of sober and multiply disabled, and trying to find like within all of those labels that are supposed to define me, it actually makes it more confusing, because I'm just a wholesome person. I'm a queer person who is disabled. I am a person of color who is sober. It's just all of them exist within inside of me, and I don't feel like I have to, or I should divide it. That feels like a colonial way to do it. That word own, I really, really struggle with. And like most of the time show up as the most queer person with all the rainbows and all the accessories. But then having this restraint when it comes to identifying as disabled in the same spaces, where I feel like as a queer person, I can navigate those spaces well, and I can show up and be myself. But if I showed up as my disabled self, then that's when the otherness happens. That's when awkward conversations. I feel whenever I tell people that I'm disabled, there's this idea that they want to know everything. They want to give me unsolicited advice about how to deal with pain. Part of my disabilities is that I'm partially sighted. So they're like, oh, you could just wear glasses. Like, it's neurological. And like the mental gymnastics of having to explain that to a population where I just want to fit in and I just want to enjoy space and not be forced to talk about things that are sometimes hard to talk about. We need to leave room for people to show up as whoever they are, but also have privacy when they want that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really like what you said about kind of the problem with the language owning. You know, I just am. And I think, like, I do feel in some ways, you know, because I am born in Taiwan, and in some ways I feel lucky to be here, to be able to be open with my queerness at a fairly young age. You know, obviously growing up, you know, there was still a lot of cultural and societal resistance. But, you know, compared to what it was like with some of my peers in Taiwan, it's much easier to be queer here for sure. But I do feel like, you know, like, for example, I recently started being more open about my queerness within like the Chinese community, like in interviews, like speaking about queerness in Chinese or in Mandarin. And that was like really scary because, and I've been like very openly queer, like for a very, very long time within the English speaking community. So like, again, figuring out that intersectionality and different level of openness and different level of safety that is available. I would say like, it's a fluid process, you know, and, you know, throughout every single day of, you know, the activities that I do, you know, moving through institutions, as an artist, there are many different ways you can present your queerness. But I'm just always, I am the way I am. And depending on what people are willing to see, you know, that's what shows up for them.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to reiterate how impactful and helpful it is to hear you, Harmony, bring up the about the language own, and for you to just to echo that, because hearing you say that makes so much sense, and just the way that like you described that we are all a fully formed person. It's not these little fragmented selves that we can present. So
and it's within conversations like this, I think amongst people of color, I can have those conversations. With white people, it's so nuanced that it's hard to explain what it's like to be marginalized in different ways, and like why the word ownership is a struggle for a lot of us to identify with.
You know, I feel that also, the only reason why we would ever say half something is because you're identifying what others you in white society. It's very colonial in and of itself. And I'm not here to answer your answer your curiosity of what am I? Because I know who I am.
Yeah.
Do you feel like people ask you that a lot in Vancouver specifically? Yeah. That was like a Lord.
Every fucking day. Yeah.
even within spaces where you don't think that people would ask questions like that, like you think that the queer community is like super accepting because we've already been marginalized as queer people. And I remember being outside of Numbers and this person walking up to me and saying like, oh, what language do you speak? And I knew that was going to be, okay, that's the first question. And I said, English. And they're like, no, but what language like do you speak? And I'm like, still English. Where are you from? I'm like, Langley. And I just was not giving in, like just completely deadpan. But then I went inside and met up with my friends and they were like, what just happened? Like, you look upset. And I'm like, I can't explain it. And I don't want to. I just want to kind of process it and unpack it in the ways that I need to and talk about it within spaces where I feel safe to do so.
What's interesting is I work in public. So I transitioned in public, and people had already known me for about a decade and a half just through, asking me questions and getting help in a library context. And suddenly the librarian was changing. So I got a lot of, are you this or are you that? And for the record, I'm a trans woman, so she, her, hers. But I still sometimes get that, and over the phone, I get some very interesting, comments like, I come to believe that you shouldn't really make, assumptions about who's talking on the other end of the line. But unfortunately, sometimes people do, and actually often people do, whether they say so or not. So that's one of the hazards of, and then there's other people who, for various reasons have maybe some difficulty processing sudden changes, through no fault of their own. So the librarian one day is one way seemingly, and next day. So if they're not picking up on cues in the room, they're just going to say so out loud through no fault of their own. So I have had to deal with that and understand that because I already had that background in working with people. Racially, certainly for years here and there, both Montreal and here, where are you from? It was a big thing. Born in Montreal, actually my mother was born in Montreal too, right? Her parents and 4 brothers were born in the Caribbean, but she was actually one of the first to actually have a citizenship card. Before that, you were a British subject. Confederation happened, but you were considered a British subject up until about 1947. So where are you from? It's like, well, East End of Montreal. Yeah. What are you? Heard that. So, yeah. And then get the list, are you this, are you this, are you this. Doesn't happen so much anymore, but it did when I started working. After graduating, when I started working, I was in a community that was not very, in a workplace that wasn't very reflective of the community around it yet. It's getting better, but so there's a lot of curiosity.
I have a more direct question for you, Carmel. How did the BC Jewish Queer and Trans Oral History Project get started, and what has been the impact on the community?
Well, I'm happy to nerd out on Jewish, queer, and trans history any day of the week. So first, a little bit of background information. In 2019, JQT was about a year old, and we were newly established as a group of volunteers, and we were looking for creative and interesting ways to connect with the Jewish community. And I texted my friend who was working at the time at the Jewish Museum, and I said, hey, do you have anything in your archives that's LGBTQ related? And the answer was no. And I said, surely, a photograph, something. And they said, no, we don't have anything, but would you be interested in doing an oral history project? And I hadn't done an oral history project ever, so we had to get training on how to do that. And fast forward 3 years, I conducted a total of 38 interviews. Yeah, it was amazing. The average age was 64. The oldest was 85. Oh. Very cute. And we curated their stories and put them into an online exhibit, which you can find at www.jqtvancouver.ca. And it contains a timeline of 100 years of Jewish LGBTQ history in BC from the 1920s until the 2020s. And you're going to learn about the first Jewish gay man that we are aware of. His name was Max Dexel, and he owned a shoe store on Granville Street. And he would make sure that he carried high heels that were in larger sizes for all the queens in town.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So this is like the 1920s, by the way. And then it also chronicles the split among rabbis on same-sex marriage in the various different synagogues. It was not the same across the entire community. In fact, I remember hearing accounts of people who were for same-sex marriage or against, I can't remember which one, but wearing lapels and pins to the synagogue. So it was very, very political. And then it celebrates pockets of various different communities popping up here and there on the islands in rural BC, how they're celebrating being Jewish and queer, and also Jewish involvement at, like, in the queer community at Vancouver Pride. You might know the names of Alan Herbert, may his memory be for a blessing, recently passed this year, and then Carol Delenko, who's another member in the community. And AIDS Vancouver. So, I mean, we've always been here. We will always be here. And beyond that, beyond the timeline, we have a beautiful qualitative essay that weaves together the 100 years of the interviews. A focus piece on the Klesbians, which is a lesbian klezmer music group in Victoria.
That's an amazing name.
It's the best name. It's the best. And they're wacky, and I love them. And then when you go through...
That name makes me reconsider listening to klezmer.
You know, they invited me for a Passover Seder, a lesbian Passover Seder. If you ever get an invitation, you must drop everything. You must refuse your own mothers. And you must go to the island, which is what I did. And I went, and it was honestly the most amazing experience because we were playing klezmer music. We were celebrating the liberation of the Jewish people at Passover in the most gay way. And I actually have wonderful memories, and this is not in my script, but they said the only payment is that you come with your fiddle. How they found out I was a violinist is beyond me. But they made sure that I had a violin when I got there so I could play with them, and it was very, very sweet. But anyway, going back to the Oral History Project, I really encourage all of you, if you want to get a chance to know what it's like to be Jewish and queer trans in BC, to just click on the different videos, listen to the little excerpts of people sharing their stories. I really love their like little nuggets of wisdom. Very, very sweet. And then to answer the second part of the question, the impact of the oral history on the community today, I mean, it's still unfolding. One of the first things that we found out during the interviews is that a community needs assessment was conducted in 2004 in the Jewish community that never saw the day of light. And it had been collecting dust on some person's table on Salt Spring Island for nearly 2 decades. And literally, as I'm filming her and discussing, she's like putting it into an envelope and sending it out to me. And I said, make sure there's a tracking number. Anyway, it arrived. And I was able to use that to inform our 2022 community needs assessment and compare data points to see what has or has not changed in the past 2 decades. Another thing that we found out during the interviews is, well, we were hearing from a bunch of people who are getting older and on in years, their fears of anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia in assisted living and long-term care homes, and really holding off the need to receiving medical attention because of this fear. And so that helps to create the JQT Seniors Initiative, a community response network, to try to bring together Jewish as well as queer as well as healthcare organizations to really talk about what's going on. The fact is that when you do get older and an assessment is made as to where you're going to go, no one, not the health authority and not the homes, are asking if you are a member of the LGBTQ community. It's up to you to disclose that information. And so if, you know, we talk about how it's so important to have person-centered care, but if this is not on the radar of the caregivers, on the places that you are, then I mean, that's a big concern.
Right.
So we're making some big changes, and one of the things that we put together was a seniors resource guide. We asked the heavy questions, and we did receive responses, very transparent, honest responses from the Jewish community, the queer community, and healthcare on what is available for our older community members, and the situation is pretty bleak. I do highly recommend that you take a look at it. The last chapter is on death and dying, and I mean, that can happen at any point, at any time. You don't have to be older necessarily. And there are some challenges that we're seeing already. For example, how are you navigating Jewish Orthodox burial if you are a non-binary person or someone who's trans? Also, if you end up in a home that follows Jewish Orthodox law, you will not be eligible for MAID, medical assistance in dying. And these are some things that we don't think about as we get older, but that we really, really need to plan in advance about. So these are some of the big things that are happening in our community, and I just really hope that we will be able to make some positive changes in the years to come.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carmel. Thank you for sharing. Nancy, did you have want to add?
Yeah, because I'm a practicing artist, I move a lot within like non-queer spaces as well too. So a lot of my life kind of is, I do queer activities within queer spaces, but I also move within very, very white spaces, very, very male dominated spaces, hetero male dominated, cis het male dominated spaces.
Very important differentiation.
Yeah. But, you can create safety within those spaces as well too. And then, a big part of my practice is showing up in those spaces and resisting in those spaces, because me being in those spaces, me being through art institutions, me being in very male dominated spaces, by being there, I can see the other people that are there. There's other queer folks, there's other femme folks, there's other racialized folks, there's other people with different lived experiences there that could identify with me. And, I can create my work and move through institutions and have it available, have exhibitions, have shows available. So then by taking up that space, like the queer folks, the QT BIPOCs that come through can feel like, oh, this is something that I can achieve. This is something that is possible. And to be able to create safety, obviously, it's not a walk in the park. It's going to be hard for them too. But I know that I've had other artistic mentors and elders that came before me that had it way harder. In 2023, I can go into an art institution and make queer art. No one's going to say anything about that. But that was not the case, just 30 years ago. So, I think it's a safety is an ongoing process. It's it's an ever evolving kind of culture that will be changing. And, what I can do is kind of carve a path for myself. And by carving a path for myself, it provides a pathway for other people, for younger folks to kind of come after me, to be able to, make something of their own as well. Because, I work with youth all the time. Their politics are way more ahead of me. I'm learning so much stuff from them. I'm old school. I'm learning new language and new discourse from them. And and I think it's just a great way to be able to do that. And also I think as an artist, moving through these spaces, it also offers opportunities for a heterosexual dude to be exposed to new things, and also to be hey, maybe I'm not so straight after all. You know what I mean? That's happened before, you need to be able to take up spaces, in that way. So people be hey, I kind of like that too, I'm kind of into that, does that make me gay?
There is a spectrum.
Move in, you can come through and go back. The door's open for you. And also, because I'm also a culture producer, I'm also a curator. So, I do work that is queer focused work, but I also do stuff that's just open. It's I'm, a queer Asian femme, and like I have certain histories and certain other identities, and by me making the space, it's open to everybody, but because like of my like role in it, I can set a tone. I run like a DIY art space in Chinatown. And, it's like, I'm not like, this is Asians only space, but it happens that a lot of Asian folks come and use the space. But, there's a lot of like white allies and stuff that kind of come through the space as well too. But, they're moving through the space in a respectful way, and they're moving through space in a curious way. And in recent years, because I had that exhibition Union, and I've been engaging more with the Chinese speaking community. And, obviously their politics, it's a little bit more conservative in a lot of ways. And maybe some of the questions that are being asked are, if somebody asked me that in English, I'd be like, you're ignorant. But, it's like, but it's like, like I have like older Chinese elders like asking me about, queerness, is this right, the morality of it, and things like that. But at the same time, it's like I can give them the time of day to explain to them and for them to see me as who I am. I am a resident of Chinatown. I do take up space there. Maybe not everybody, not all the old seniors there align with my queer politics, but they still say hi to me every day. They still see me as who I am. They still, want to engage with me. They're still curious about it. And I think there's a way to kind of meet people in the middle, to be able to see that, like, okay, you're like an 80-year-old man, and you're in low-income housing, and in many ways that, like, sure, you don't quite understand my queerness. But you can't, you don't understand English, and you can't read your like mail that from the government. So in some ways, it's like I can't really see it as like you're being prejudiced towards me, because in many ways I'm so much more privileged and accepted within these white institutions than this person that is, kind of like not unsure about this like concept of queerness. And I always like to remind, within like Chinese communities that like this like more conservative perspective is a very recent thing. Like all you have to do is look at literature from like 3,000 years ago. Like people are mad queer,
Yes.
So it's all in the literature, It's like it's only recently, that like it's a little bit more conservative, But it's like gender and like sexual orientation and all those things have been fluid, and it's been in flux like throughout history. And they were really good at documenting history, so it's all there in the books, So yeah.
I feel that. So my undergrad degree was in Asian Studies, Language, and Culture. I grew up not really knowing much about my Japanese Canadian side or Japanese side. And one of the topics that I was super obsessed with were the woodblock prints of the floating world, and all of the crazy queer stuff like the wakashu, who are the muses of the, kabuki actors and everything. Anyway, Asia, super queer. And then Christianity came. Something else that you were saying reminded me, it's Chinatown related. So I paddle and I steer for the Dragon Boat team for Chinatown, called Flower Bridge, which in Cantonese is Fa Q. And it is the most amazing experience of my life. And I overheard, because I was sharing what I do. Well, one of the rules is to not talk about work, but I did share that I did this oral history project. And they said that, and I asked are you trying to collect any stories from the elderly Chinese community about queer stories? And they say, well, we don't even have a word for queer. It's like stranger. And when they do ask about people, they'd be like, oh yeah, that one guy who never got married and like used to do this, this, and this, and this. So I just really hope that there's a way to also collect the stories from the community.
Yeah, I do feel like it's a bit slower. And I mean, like there's Pride in Chinatown that started like 5 or so years ago. But, I do feel like it's kind of slower in terms of the way it's moving. Just to give context, like same-sex marriage was only legalized in Taiwan, like recently. It's still illegal everywhere else. So, I think there's also like that part of it, it's like it's like already being marginalized, and then like bringing upon other illegal identities upon yourself. It's like it makes it so people don't want to kind of promote their queerness or whatever. So it becomes silenced in some ways. But we all know, like, it's been around. But I think it's just like, I think it does take some of the youth, and there's actually a lot of like youth organizing within kind of like Chinese or even within like East Asian communities these days, that it's really amazing to be able to see their drive and their desire to create kind of intergenerational connections. So I think it's just a matter of time that we will be able to see more of that and be able to kind of have access to more of those archives, because a lot of times like those archives maybe are not in books, you know, or maybe not in like formalized, like institutionalized, like colonial forms of like archival practices. A lot of like, you know, queerness comes from like even just like offering food or culinary things, you know, like things that happen within private domestic spaces that show like queer love, you know. So I think it's just a matter of time. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy. Harmony, yes. I would love to hear from you a little bit more about your work in harm reduction and accessibility, and just if you wouldn't mind speaking to the intersectionality of disability and queerness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have a couple of different avenues that I do work-wise. I do disability justice workshops with Heather McCain from Let's, formerly CAN, and we host workshops where we talk about disability justice and we talk about ableism and let people ask the questions that they're scared to ask of other people. The people that commission us for workshops, they want to do better. They want to know the things that they can and can't say. But in a lot of spaces, if you show up not knowing everything, then you're shamed for that. So we just meet people at the level where they are and help them unpack internalized ableism. We talk about our own internalized ableism and how that even shows up for disabled people, because we're all living within these internalized ableist structures and have for the 41 years that I've been alive. So if something pops out that I'm like, oh no, that's not appropriate to say, I do it in front of people. I correct myself in front of people, because I know that weight of shame, it's hard to teach people or hard to like come together with people and ask them to do something that is like uncomfortable. Like we all know what that uncomfortability feels like, and allow for that. In my work in harm reduction, I work as a sober buddy, and I've started going to recently connected with like a burner community and seeing the amount of drugs and sex that happens within those spaces in unsafe ways. So started showing up with harm reduction supplies, and like doing that from like an angle of like, we know that these things that you're accessing, you are allowed to access them, but let's have it be a safer way. Like nobody needs to lose their life because of a party or a drug that they choose to do. We all need to be able to access the coping mechanisms that we need to access in a safer way. And in a lot of those ways, like I suffer from a lot of mental health conditions, and that makes everything hard, honestly.
Yeah.
So when it comes to anxiety, if I'm in a space and I'm creating the space as opposed to just taking up and being a participant, then when I have my little panic attacks, like I know that I'm there for a job. So I can turn that anxiety around and be like, hey, what would you need to be safer right now? Like what would make you more comfortable? And like going around to people and even just talking to them is a big part of everything I do. And like having people, sorry, I'm losing my words for a second.
You're good. You're good. Take your space and take a breath.
Thank you. Yeah, it's difficult to unpack all of like the personal connections I have that like really do heal myself. Like I was kicked out of the house when I was 14, and that's a young age to be all alone. And I always have that like air of like it's hard to rely on other people. It's hard to trust the world around me that it's going to be a safe place. And I know that I can do something. Like if I tangibly look at safety as being like this quantifiable thing, what do you need to feel safe in any way that you can? And sometimes that's just people that understand that you can go to them. Like a lot of people in disability justice workshops, they'll ask for like a list of accommodations for disabled people. And certainly there are lists that can be created, but for a lot of people, it's like each disabled person. I have 4 concurrently running chronic conditions, and they all have different kind of access needs, and that exists within the hundreds of disabilities that exist within people. So it's more so that idea that like, hey, like let's try and workshop an idea. There was a party where the accessible seating area was like so far off to the side and the fellow couldn't see the stage, and he's like, this is kind of unacceptable. I'm like, I agree. And I grabbed a chair from like one area in the club and I put his name on it, and I'm like, this seat is for this person. And like was able to kind of like brainstorm that, because I talked to people and we conceptualized what being taken care of would look like. Yeah.
I think that that's a really beautiful way to offer community care through this lens of safety and like reflection as to like what would make you feel safer, and then being able to extend that to your community at large. It sounds healing, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like it's selfish to just enjoy the space that I have as a queer elder. I've been out in the community for 20 years. I owe it to not even the next generation, but just the people who are just coming out now. I owe them some sort of safer place like that fills my heart to be able to do that. And like all of those the people that I'm working with, like they want to see me. Like I see them coming towards me with a smile on their face, and that fixes all those times and all those institutions and all of that oppression that told me that I don't belong, that told me that I was somehow broken, and the reason it was so hard had something to do with me. To sit even amongst everyone here, like I feel so like humbled by that. Like y'all are such amazing like community leaders, and here I am just a self-advocate that just likes to talk to people and do whatever I can to make the world a little bit better.
You're a leader too.
Yeah. And seeing Gen Z, like my son, the way that he just takes on the world is amazing. And like when he came out, it wasn't a coming out, it was just like, hey, by the way, I'm dating this person named Ken. And I was like, oh my God, you're queer? This is amazing.
Like, yes, baby.
Yeah, it was a celebration. I mean, we were going through a rough time, and I remember we'd gone to the island to watch a friend because she had like a Purple Rain kind of Prince cover band thing going on, and I was really struggling with sobriety and with depression, and he knew that, you know, him revealing this information would be something that was celebrated instead of me, who was like accused of being a lesbian because I had Elwood DVDs in my house and like all of these things that it was a question as to like how it was going to affect them, and I'm like, hey, I'm the one who's queer and dealing with it.
Yeah.
Whereas to let people in and be able to share experiences like that, and it's great, and I hope I can do it until like the day I'm gone, just like
so cute. Thank you, Harmony.
Thank you.
Okay, so for all of you wonderful folks, I just want to pose the question: how do you see us as queer folks in this community in so-called Vancouver, and yourself in the different work that you do in those different lanes? How do we come together in these different intersections for future collaboration and like stewarding of space for queer community in so-called Vancouver? That's like a big question, slightly rambled as I posed it all to you, so take from it what you can, please.
I'm happy to start us off.
Yes, please.
Okay, so a few things. Aside from JQT and the cross-cultural walking tours, I'm a community engagement professional, so this is kind of my jam to do things together. And one of the things that most people don't know is that the game Mahjong is deeply, deeply a huge source of pride for both the Asian and the Jewish community.
I have to say, my Jewish grandmother played Mahjong every week growing up, from like until she really could not, like right until the end. Like
she probably referred to it with her ladies as Maj.
Yes, absolutely.
So you just need to look at the first episode. I think in the first 30 seconds of Seinfeld, George Costanza's mom is like playing Maj with her ladies. Anyway, so why is this important? I want to do a cross-cultural queer Mahjong series for the month of May, which is Jewish and Asian Heritage Months.
My month? I can just feel my grandma grandmother from the beyond being like, you better be there. You better be there, Chloe.
Because, this brings me so much joy because it's not just the game and I want to teach y'all how to like play it because there are different versions of it. But it's also like what comes with mahjong. It's the food, it's the talk, the gossip at the table. It's like the matchmaking that happens. It's the, like aggro passive aggressiveness that happens at the tables. It's all the things. So it's an open invitation to everyone around the table as well as anyone out there because we need funding.
So
to celebrate Asian, queer, and Jewish Heritage Months, let's be in touch. There's a lot of other things that I can think about for us to collaborate on, but I think that's a really fun one.
I love that. Yeah, I'm kind of in the beginning stages of putting together like a queer directory that just kind of like is a bunch of resources because I've had to access like social services and being low income and needing like, all of the things that you need in life. And for those months where like you can't afford food, where can you go? And like these different things, because I think like within the disabled community, or maybe I'll compare it to the heterosexual cis community first, is like within the heteronormative world, there's this idea of scarcity and like they see like if we are happy, if we're fed, if we're that somehow takes away from other people. And queer disabled folks, the ones in my circle at least, we don't, and I made a really good analogy, so I'm gonna try and get it out. Yes. But like we take the resources that we have, we take the symptom management techniques that we have, we learn about people's like disabilities and how they differ from ours in the sense of what they need, and instead of like, and we treat them like trading cards, and like instead of buying for like the golden card like Pavel Bure like in the like early Canuck days, like instead of just holding on to those and keeping them from other, we take them and make copies and make sure that everybody knows what we know, and try and do that in a larger scale than just one-to-one interactions, starting like social groups where like disabled people, you don't have to disclose that you're disabled to be able to access a space. But a lot of people struggle with that because it comes with it like this negative stigma, and like if you require no disclosure, you let people come as is, and a lot of the work like that I do, it like doesn't want to subscribe to the binary. So like not disabled versus non-disabled, it's like just everyone. What do we all need to be able to like function in spaces and feel like seen and represented? That representation thing is so important. Like I remember the first time that I saw like Made in China like perform, and I saw the beauty that could exist with an Asian queer person, and just being completely moved by it, because suddenly like that Filipino queerness, like it wasn't a negative thing anymore, and I saw what that looked like. But the only reason I could dream bigger than who I am and bigger than people think that I am is by seeing it. So yeah,
absolutely. Vanessa.
I know what you mean, that last part, because this year Barbados had its third Pride.
Amazing.
So I was great. I kept sharing it all over the place. And also I said, well, I wonder what they're doing in Italy. So I went over to the very region that my ancestors are from, and they were having their own Pride.
Yes.
Oh. So I thought, well, this is good. This is very good. So
Yay.
this is good.
Yeah. We're growing. Yeah. Representation.
Yeah.
So I run this space in Chinatown, and like I also like live in it. It's complicated, but Vancouver space
is complicated.
Just like space itself is a very politicized topic.
Yeah.
Having space, being able to access just physical space. So for me, like living in this studio, because it's a heritage building, which we have heritage zoning, so it's protected, and it's got like live work kind of space, So I live in this studio space, live work studio space, and one of the things that I'm blessed, to have access to the space is that I can open up my studio to host events in there. And I think like the biggest part of my kind of contribution to my community, whether queer, Asian, BIPOC, like whatever like communities that, or people who are low income, because my space is quite affordable for people to access, is being able to kind of like have space and then have people come through my space and to be able to run events or like shoot videos, shoot photos. And then I think a big part of it, like anyone that operates space in Vancouver realizes how much advocacy it requires. And a big part of what I do is, I also, speak with the city, I speak with grant funders. I try to advocate for more equitable ways for public funding systems to exist. Because accessing that system, the bureaucracy of that system is just so
Colonial.
difficult. And colonial.
Yeah.
It's so difficult,
Yeah.
For people. And also writing is not everyone's, way of communication. So a big part of, me offering the space is I meet with these bureaucrats to figure out like what other kind of pilot programs and funding systems can we kind of create to make my space and other spaces more affordable. And in return, when I do a lot of like grant coaching workshops with folks. And in return, what I do is also, I offer also political literacy for people to be like, okay, like, this space exists because of this, having transparency. I talked to this person about this funder and this thing. And these fundings are all, dependent on like what government and what politicians we have voted in power. So funding is, it's not permanent either. So, we can't always depend on it. It takes political advocacy. And I think, as someone who, I'm 34 now, and the people that I work with a lot of Gen Zs, as to remind them how important it is for you to, not only it's great to party and enjoy yourselves, but the fact that, there's a space for you queer folks to party, that like took like decades of political advocacy for that to exist. So it is also exactly.
It's not over.
No, it's not over. So it's like it's also your responsibility to know and to be educated, to be politically literate, to know that like I can give you this, subsidized like studio space for you to host an event, but you have to remember that this is not forever and it takes work from you to be able to create this space for yourself and the next generation that comes after.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, and like passing the baton, sort of.
Exactly, the tools for them to be able to navigate these systems.
Yeah.
So are we having mahjong at your place?
Honestly, I grew up on mahjong. I've been watching mahjong. I've been playing it since I was like 5 years old.
You can coach us.
I play the Taiwanese one though.
It's all good.
I'm flexible.
Okay, well, that segues well. I have a direct question for you, Nancy. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience in Chinatown's queer evolution and your mentorship, like you were mentioning, and kind of carving a path for those to follow.
Yeah, and I think like the being like openly queer within kind of the Chinese Canadian community is still like a relatively new thing. It was July 1st this year. That was just a 100-year anniversary of the Exclusion Act. So this is all like quite recent history. And I do, I think the youth is kind of really what's making the political environment different these days, and I feel very hopeful working with all the youth. One of my jobs and things that I love to do is I do a lot of artistic mentorships with young creatives and artists. I work with the Festival Recorded Movement, I'm 4, and I also do like VR and XR kind of workshops as well. And I think like, I don't like necessarily like promote like that, like, oh, I only want to mentor like queer kids. But it just happened that there's all these queer kids that are like, oh, I want to work with Nancy and stuff. And it just happens, and I think it's like a very organic process, and some people that I work with maybe are not, didn't know that they're queer until it's like years later, they're like in the queer parties, and things like that. I'm like, oh, okay, I see this, and I think a big part of it is also just like providing the support for them too, because like I was also kicked out when I was 16, so I know what it's like. I know how important like housing and having stability is. Like you can't make things when you're like being displaced or moving from house to house, and it's like you don't have the capacity to offer more. So I do understand how important like those type of things are, and to be able to kind of offer a space, because also like a lot of like, especially a lot of the queer Asian youth that I work with, a lot of them are not out to their families, you know? They can't afford to move out on their own. They're not out to their families. They're being like forcibly kept in the closet. You know, maybe they try to come out and, you know, it's like the family is not accepting, and there's all these kinds of things. So being able to offer kind of like another environment, a different space for them to be able to be themselves, and also, you know, offer like resources that, I really like what you said about like the resources, like, you know, offering like funding resources, housing resources, maybe like low cost therapy resources for people, or like just being like a community connector, being like, okay, I know someone is moving out, maybe you can come chill with them, or like, I know you're having problems at home right now, like, you know, I'm away for the next 2 weeks, you can come crash at my place when I'm gone, you know, just offering that kind of like queer kinship, that, you know, it's like I don't have my own children, but I, in some ways, I feel like I have like children, you know, adult children, and I think like to me like that really fills me, like to know that I have this like community to fall back onto, you know. It's like I feel like sometimes, like especially I work in the arts, and like the art scene is like super like music and DJ and like art institute, it's super gatekeepy, super gate. That is the theme of those institutions. Like I'm like, sometimes I'm like, why do you have to be like that? And I really like what you talked about in terms of like not seeing things through the lens of scarcity. Like we are abundant, like there is abundance, you know, you just have to make the abundance happen, you know. Like sure, like there's, you know, capitalism and like limited resources with certain things, but there's ways to make abundance, and I really like, you know, just like reminding myself that, because sometimes, you know, I get down and I'm like, oh my god, like why am I dealing with this stuff, like, you know. And it's just good to remember that, like, you know, you've created this like abundant kind of community, and you're able to offer this kind of space, and you can also rely on them to be able to support you through certain kind of, you know, rough patches and stuff. And I think, yeah, I just feel like, you know, queer kinship is just like, that is like the source of like collaboration and just life.
Yeah, I think something that you said was like really beautiful, and what everybody is saying in this like notion and theme of abundance, especially with queerness. Something that I observe in so-called Vancouver that's happening is this like abundant wealth that's not financial, like you're talking, like to be able to have folks that are like, I know this person who's moving out, or like, oh, you're having a hard time, you could try this resource. And so like hearing you talk about that, creating more abundance from like what's already in here is just so special.
Yeah, like some people think like, they're like, man, I don't know how you do all this stuff at your house. It's like how, like some weeks I have like 4 events at my living place, you know, and it's just like, it's, you know, it does get intense sometimes. You know, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. You know, it's a lot of people, a lot of energies and stuff, but then it's like the reward is amazing, you know. So I'm all about like, and it's nice that it's my house too, because it's like people won't dare to act, you know, disrespectful because it's also my house. You know, so it's kind of it's nice to be able to offer that type of space.
Thank you for offering. I'm going to move into a question for you, Vanessa, please. Can you please speak to the evolution of your experience as an artist and librarian since moving here in 1995, and the importance of folks being able to access spaces like VBL, where you
Right, well, we'll start in 1995.
Yes, let's start there.
I'm 53.
And you look fabulous.
I was just turning 25 in 1995. I had just lost my mother the previous year, and my grandfather, same side of the family. And in fact, actually, it was my grandfather's birthday that I landed in Vancouver. Both of my grandfather's birthdays in different years. And so I was starting off with a few suitcases and about 6 boxes. A co-worker of my mother's, her son was studying medicine out here, so I was staying in his condo while he was with his partner at a wedding in Britain. Then I moved on to campus. That's how I got started here, and I was the definition of closeted. So this visual wasn't there. It was at the far recesses of my mind. I think one time when I was a toddler, I think, I used to watch my mother and grandmother get ready to go out. And in those days, there were the fake eyelashes and the wigs. And it was fascinating. So I wanted to do the same thing. And after letting me try that, I think once, then it was kind of shut down. And I locked it back there somewhere. And there was always this kind of subtext, but I tried not to feel the subtext because it was just really uncomfortable. And I had to go through all of that loss in the family, move to the other side of the country, be in my own space, do intensive therapy and personal growth workshops, experiential stuff. And it was just doing that archaeology in yourself to kind of figure out who you are, not knowing what you're going to find, right? It's not like, in a few years I'll figure out on this. I didn't know that. And at the same time, go through graduate school, get the career started off, make friends, all of this stuff going on at the same time. I didn't, it took many years, it took a failed relationship, and it took a lot of setbacks before I was stuck with myself and thought, well, I think this is who I am at the end of all of that. And so I didn't launch into anything yet. I did a lot of homework and research. I talked to a lot of people. And I realized, a lot of the subliminal stuff I had been dealing with for many years. And that's where it was pointing. Like I had literally tried my best to be the person that a lot of folks wanted me to be, and it just wasn't panning out. So at 40, and I had been working in my field for about 12 years, I started to move forward with, hormone therapy, et cetera, et cetera. When I came out, I know this is a bit of a digression, but anyway.
Digress.
I had a complicated relationship with my family in a lot of ways, with my mother, I know, but I know that when she was passing on, she was very concerned about how I was going to do afterwards. Although why could have been any number of reasons. With my father and stepmother, relationship was a bit more complicated along, these kinds of issues. But when I finally did come out to them, they had decided to get married. So it was their second marriage, both of them. When I finally did come out to them, and they were accepting. So, and it was quite moving. They said, not only we're coming out to visit. Like I was saying, if you didn't feel like coming out to visit, that's fine. And they showed me their ticket online. Right? So that was 2014. And then the following year, I went to Montreal for my bottom procedure. So being born twice in the same city. And my folks put me up afterwards because there's quite a long recovery. So what I noticed was interesting is that, fear of loss. Right, I just as soon as we got close again, I was like, I'm going to lose them, kind of like, yeah. So that's something I've been dealing with. So I'm looking forward to seeing them again in about 6 weeks or so. Yay! But with the library field, it's there's been so many different levels of trying to get into it. A lot when I was in library school, there's a lot of people who felt. How do I put this? There was a lot of polite racism in it. It's like either why did I want to be a librarian? I didn't look like a librarian. Or if I was going to be in the field, probably not out here at West. Yeah, in Western Canada. This isn't like you probably should be in New York or places like that. This is kind of. Why not just come out and say, well, this is kind of a white city somewhat, right? So you're probably not going to find much out there. Well, I'm still here, right?
Yes, you are.
Look at you now.
Almost 30 years. That's most of my life now, or a significant part of it. So dealing with that and then getting, I was lucky enough to find steady work within a year, 2 years after graduating. So when I ended up having to come out at work, it was a big deal, and it happened in stages. But by that time, it went very well too. I remember starting back to work after I had got my name stuff changed and was now going to present 24/7. I got to my desk, and there were flowers, and it was almost Valentine's, so there were hard candies and stuff. One of my coworkers used to be a florist, so there was a nice flower arrangement there. I had sent an email, and the HR person at the time sent an email out to the rest of the staff while I was away, because I took a month off before doing that. So that went well, and I've thought, I've had a lot of ups and downs in my career and in my positions there, but I've started to come around to the idea that I wanted to make a contribution to the field, but also use the fact that I was a public librarian and my experience now to help the larger society in various communities. There is no one else of African descent that's ever worked in my particular library system. I can't speak for the other cities, and beyond, obviously there is, but and also trans representation. There's a couple of other people, I think, very recently, the past few years. But this is it. And with 25 years experience and a librarian in a library system where there aren't that many librarians anymore. They've done a lot of downsizing. They figure librarians are expensive. And some libraries' collective agreements make it easier to do that, right? So a rare individual. So I've thought, probably for several years, I've been wanting to somehow give back. I think a library would be a centerpiece for it. So it was some interesting discussions, but then things kind of faded, and then COVID happened. And somewhere towards the end of that, I was working with some people at work to have a series of public talks for the public, where people would come in from various cultural groups in BC and talk about their experience and the history of their communities and stuff. It was very well received. It was hybrid. And I advocated for and made sure that we had one that focused on Black BC history, and we had some good speakers. And one of them happened to mention that VBL was an idea, and I thought, I've never heard of these folks. Who are they? They were a group of students. I thought, terrific. I've got to figure out who these people are, because I've got a box of stuff that I've been saving for a library. And I collect a lot of books, but I had a box or two of things, some of them very specific to BC and Canada or the West Coast. So the following year in the spring, I went to a cataloging party, and I brought a lot of my donations over and introduced myself. And then I found the executive director, and I said, look, I'm a librarian, 25 years experience, and here, I have my donations, there's more, and if you need anything, all just let me know. That's it. It's like a blank check. It's like anything you want. Anything you want. The kind of thing you would, as a consultant, you might offer a client for a fee and say, don't worry about anything like that. You just ask. I'll do what I can, right? Or even if it's just advice, right? So, and they're appreciative. I know that. I was just speaking to one of them yesterday, and I know it's hit home, which is good. That's what I like to hear. There's other ways, when I used to do radio at UBC, I was an alumni by that time. I know that people appreciated the show. I had people come up who were like university freshmen. I would do a late night show, and I was playing Motown and 60s and all kinds of stuff. And they come in and go, what's that? Let me put another song on, and then I'll explain. So that's what I try to pass on. Our world used to be quite different in a lot of ways. And you can have a perspective by knowing.
So the question is talking about taking up space, and also how we can bear witness to our stories so that there is an erasure of BIPOC voices. So I'm going to try to answer all of these things because that's very wide and encompassing. In terms of taking up space, JQT's mission is to queer Jewish space and to Jewify queer space. And we do this as volunteers. I'm an unpaid executive director of a nonprofit that also doesn't have space and who has opened one's home into the community. And so So I definitely understand what that's like. And I mean, strong boundary settings.
Yeah.
I no longer host inside my home, but my garden.
Beautiful.
You may use the washer. Shoes off. It's a Japanese house.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's really important when talking about space. Well, we're going to cut that bit out. But I do want to take a moment to talk about heart space for a minute. The reason why JQT was established was to honor the memory of my cousin, who was murdered in a mass shooting against the queer community. And so may his memory be for a blessing. And so I initially started as an ally, and through doing this work, realized I'm hella queer. I mean, I think I always knew I was, but I never put a label on it. And I'm really proud of the work that JQT does and where we're at today. I got it. Sorry, you can tell that we're getting tired. Losing words, so we'll cut that one again. And then to have JQT be able to share Jewish queer trans stories on my other project, the cross-cultural walking tours, which is right here in the downtown east side of Vancouver, sharing stories of immigrant communities, Indigenous communities that either once used to call this area home or today call it home, was really important to do a queer and trans version of the walking tours for Pride Month in June. And this is how Harmony got to join us and share stories. And one of the things that I think was really important is so often our communities operate in silos, and we don't have opportunities to connect and share stories together. While I know Harmony, I'm meeting you three for the first time today, and I'm like, already the wheels are turning. I'm like, yes, we're going to do this. To have these spaces, and I'm really thankful to Vancouver Pride. Shout out to all of you for bringing us together, because this is really what it's all about. We need to share our resources and our expertise and our dreams together. And so I'm going to choose one example of true cross collaboration, which was beautiful, because when we're talking about representation, it's really important. When sharing our stories, often we prevent ourselves or limit ourselves from sharing historical fact because we might not necessarily be from that particular community. And so we miss out on getting full context and picture of what's actually happening. And so, for example, Glenn from Forbidden Vancouver's Really Gay History Tour is a research nut, just like all of us, and super wonderful. And he knew about this story of two South Asian men who were racially targeted and accused of, on trumped-up charges of sodomy. This is in the times of the Komagata Maru. And he had this story, but he didn't know how to share it as a white man, white settler here. And so Share Vancouver, a South Asian queer group, doing amazing work. Karin and Viplav from there came to join also on the walking tour. And while they immigrated here after the Komagata Maru and are newer to Vancouver, they were able to share their lived experiences in the LGBTQ community, in the South Asian community, and together they were able to share this story. And I thought it was a beautiful example of bridge building in ways that didn't erase anyone's stories, didn't put one story over the other. It didn't erase any of the information. And we were all able to really get a better sense of what was happening at the time. And I think we need to have more examples of that, where we don't exclude the bad history. We keep it all together because it's all part of the same timeline. Yeah, there were other things here that I wanted to say. But yeah, I think this is a good example of bearing witness that we learn as the organizers as well. The participants who come on our tours also learn, whether they're queer or allies. And I feel like if we are able to copy this template, this model, in all of our work, which I think you're doing a lot of as well when you're talking to bureaucrats and helping to educate people in different institutions and in the system, then I think it'll be a better place.
I just want to add one thing that I hope that everybody here and everybody out there knows this is the start of the conversation. This doesn't end at the end of this recording or this group discussion. This is where we continue on and always try to do that momentum building. But also if you all need to take a break, when I need to take a break, I take it. And I'm I understand my capacity. I'm learning to do that. So a part of stewarding and bearing witness is realizing that self-care within this industry that we've all chosen to be a part of is so very important. Yeah. Please take care of all of yourselves.
Care web.
Last point that I wanted to share, I don't know if you've heard about this, but in city planning, there's just a lot of colonialism going on. But there is a discussion around weaving, and weaving in terms of bringing in Indigenous history, knowledge, as well as QT BIPOC knowledge and history together with the colonial systems, and finding a way to merge these stories together, because it's not one without the other, because the fact is that we live in this city. And how to move forward together. And I just wanted to put that out there for any nerds listening in, that this is a beautiful model. I think it really works. I'm a believer.
Yeah.
Thank you for believing.
You're a badass, Carmel. Thank you.
I feel like resistance, we know resistance is a lifelong journey. It's not something you do for 3 years and you stop doing. So I do like the point that you brought up, that it's important to take care of ourselves, because I think to survive means that we are living archives, to exist, to be able to retell these stories, retell our experiences, retell what's happened before, memory is such a powerful and revolutionary tool. So yeah, I think, with resistance, I think it's also important that the resistance is intercultural and is also intergenerational. I do feel because of these days, because of the way the society is kind of framed, because of our technical tools that we have, age groups are siloed within their platforms. You have people on TikTok. I still keep my Facebook.
Oh yeah,
that's where all my intergenerational connections are. So I think it's important to remember that this has to be an intergenerational movement, because for me, if I did not have my QT BIPOC elders, I would not realize. Sometimes I feel so discouraged, and then all I got to do is look at their experience and be like, you know what? Change has happened. Maybe it took 20 years, but it can give you an opportunity to kind of keep going. And I think to talk about bearing witness is first of all is surviving it, being a future ancestor, becoming I want to be an elder, and being able to be there be there when I'm 70, and who knows what the world's going to be what the discourse, I might be the elder that sometimes says problematic things that gets corrected by the youth, and that's completely okay. And I think it's just important to be able to do that as well. And I do think again, talking about structures and bureaucracies, because we do live in this system, being able to support, I think, I'm a DJ, so I work in nightlife. I don't work in it as much as I did before. But, in 2014, even being a femme presenting DJ was an issue. We're not even talking about queerness. We're not even talking about the racialized part of it. We're just talking about being in a male dominant space.
Right.
So to be able to see that, 2015 and now, it's all the best parties in Vancouver are QT BIPOC, right?
Yeah.
We have Rice Cake, we have Normie Corp, there's all these dope parties with Level Up that are that exists. And I think it's really dope to be able to see all that happen. and to be able to also support, all of these artists and culture producers in making culture and like showing them how to navigate like the bureaucratic systems that are in place, so then they could also succeed on their own terms. Because a lot of times, we all live in capitalism, so financial barrier is a real thing, and that's a means to control and to oppress. So in many ways, if you are able to access your own financial resources, you have the power to also, host events at spaces, write your own rules, and conduct them based on how you want to do it. And I think being able to, especially these days, like being able to see all these amazing, dope, like the hottest QT BIPOC events happen, seeing all these beautiful people gather, it sets an example, because now the kids that are coming up, they're like, wow, this is the norm. But it's like 7 years ago, it was not even 5 years ago. Like that was not the norm, so it's like to be able to see how culture can accelerate within this direction is just like, it's totally amazing.
And seeing other people bear witness to that is like amazing.
Yeah.
Like I used to work like coat check or door at the warehouse events, and like there were people that were QT BIPOC and trans and like in this space for the first time, and like to like feel like they go in there as this very like scared person that doesn't know if this place is safe, don't know if they have to mask this or that, and to like halfway through the party, on the end of the party, just see them living their like true queer life. It's like, oh my God, I just want to hug all of them. I want to be bumped to all of them. And just like feel like you did a thing. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, I love what you have mentioned about resistance, Nancy, and it also makes me think like a little bit of rebellion, and hearing you be like, I want to be the 70-year-old elder. Like I think before I came out and was like here, I didn't realize the importance of like growing old. And like, may we all just be rebellious and resistance and be old as fuck.
As well, telling stories is important. I know I've said that in my line of work. In my line of work, one of my many hats was hosting one of the library-run book clubs. So, and they read novels every month and then come back and discuss them. And I remember, selecting some of those with the idea that these are stories you're reading. I know they're novels, but they come from, actual stories. And it's a gift to be able to do that. So I've always been aware that when I was doing radio as a volunteer, all those songs are stories too. Right? I mean, some of them are problematic and dated. I understand that. They're very het. But they're still stories. Music sounded a certain way. The style was a certain way. You could conceivably today use the same style and tell a completely different story. In fact, I wish I would hear that. I'd love to hear 50s doo-wop, but in a queer context.
Yes.
Wow.
It doesn't matter who's doing the harmonizing. It's got nothing to do with it. Right. So there was radio. After I finished the show, a couple of years later, I was funded to make a documentary using some old audio clips that a friend of mine who also used to have a show provided, and it ended up being about my own transition and the history of trans activism in Vancouver, as heard through Queer FM, which is a show and was a show as well for many years. A friend of mine founded it. So, and that was funded, so I got paid for it too. And then the station manager interviewed me about a month after it was finished, just to talk about the documentary. And also, I had got my updated birth certificate from Quebec, finally, after a year of going back and forth and all kinds of gatekeeping. And this is after surgery. So Quebec is an interesting place bureaucratically. But anyway, so there was an hour-long interview after the 2-hour-long documentary. You can still find it, as well as the show, on their CITR's archives. They archive their podcasts, which I think is the best thing they've ever done. They never used to do that a long time ago. But I thought, those shows don't come back. The people don't come back. Even if someone else does the same area, it's not the same. So, through that, as a writer, same thing. I mean, during COVID, I was working on another idea, and I was with a group of writers meeting online or outside with masks on, and something occurred to me. I said, I've had this idea. It's not Canadian, but it was like on this story of, I don't know if anyone's heard of Lucy Hicks Anderson.
No.
African-American trans woman, born in 1886 in Kentucky,
Wow.
died in 1954. But the startling thing is that rural Kentucky, her mother took her to their doctor, whoever their doctor was, and said, look, my son wants to act like their sisters and dresses in their clothing. And the doctor said, you know what, I've seen maybe a couple of cases like this. Raise your child as a girl.
Wow.
1890s.
Wow.
Rural Kentucky.
Wow.
And that's what happened.
Amazing.
And she learned how to be a domestic because her mother was a domestic, and then left home at 15. And eventually wound up in southwestern United States, a couple different locations, got married once, got divorced, married again later, Second World War. In the meantime, had become a well-off member of the community in Oxnard, California. Also ran a brothel, very successful. There's a military base near there. And everything was fine until during the Second World War, just afterwards, there was an outbreak of syphilis, so they had to do medical examinations of everybody. And she didn't understand why they had to examine her. She wasn't doing the work, she was just running the place, and they did, and they discovered they discovered her background. So her marriage was annulled, and also she had been collecting benefits through the military, so that was a federal offense. They considered that fraudulent, so she had to spend some time in Leavenworth, as did her husband. After they got out, she had made a lot of contacts in Oxnard. And her cooking was famous, and they would let her out of jail earlier because there was a Prohibition era bust or something, because the mayor had to have her create a function for him and his guests and stuff. So anyways, her second husband was from LA, so they moved to LA, and there's not really much known after that. I thought there's so much besides the sensationalism to this story. So I did all kinds of research. So I've got the material ready for a script.
Amazing.
So when this whole thing comes to some kind of settlement down there with the writers and actors, who knows what will happen. I can't find a Canadian equivalent to that story, but if anyone can, that would be fantastic.
I'm just going to get your autograph now.
Before we can.
That's not the only thing. I've seen movies like Licorice Pizza and American Graffiti. I love the style. I'd love to do something about the Compton's Cafeteria Riot done that way, with music in the soundtrack. Not overdone, but something that's very kind of the world at night kind of thing, and done maybe even in the cinema of the period, right?
This storytelling theme is so important, especially since this is a queer history panel. The people that I interviewed for the Oral History Project, JQT's Oral History Project, when asked, what have been some of the changes over the decades, they're telling stories of when they would either get beaten up or potentially killed for being part of the queer community, to being deemed clinically insane, to then taking to the streets, protesting, rallying, standing up for their rights, changing policy, being able to then marry the persons they love, all the way to being celebrated in some communities. Although I'm talking about North America specifically, this is very specific to here. And just to be able to look back on all these decades, I'm sure there are stories that are equivalent and just as amazing. But one thing I wanted to circle back on, which we didn't talk about, is whenever there is something that's tragic that happens in our community, there's focus on our community in ways that I feel are very traumatic, and I refer to it as trauma porn. And so I think it's really important for us and people in our community to really think, how does sharing our stories and how we share our stories benefit our community, and making sure that we celebrate all of our achievements. And I think that your future documentary is a beautiful Drama.
We dramatize.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
And I look at acts of like play and pleasure and all of that. They're acts of resistance against a system that doesn't want us to have any of that.
Yes.
So like that's a powerful thing. And like I love the oral history project. I feel like that is like you're taking all this history that literally would never be told if you didn't like meet with all of these people and create a space for them to be like, hey, like that's meaningful. And all of us have bodies of knowledge within ourselves, just being a part of the culture and like going through things in the ways that we went through them.
Well, so many people have been silenced. And I just wanted to share that when we were standing inside the Jewish Community Center at the exhibit launch of the Oral History Project, I asked our elders who were present to stand up and have a round of applause, and not a single dry eye. Because this was the first time they were being honored, acknowledged in a Jewish setting. It was beautiful.
Thank you for sharing.
This has been so fun.
Yeah, and thank each one of. I want to thank. I want to thank each one of you for being here and for saying yes, and for feeling like this was a safe enough space to be able to share your stories and to share stories about so-called Vancouver and the community that's going on here and everything that you're working so hard to build. So I just wanted, on behalf of myself, as what feels like a newly queer person and new to so-called Vancouver, it means so much to me to be sitting at this table with you. And thank you so much on behalf of Vancouver Pride Society. And I don't know who the sponsor is, so I should thank that person.
Denton's Law.
Denton's Law?
Oh, Con's not even here
Yeah,
now.
Denton's. Is that right?
Is it?
But yeah, thanks to Vancouver Pride too for just like really centering accessibility and everything. Like as a disabled person that doesn't usually talk about it, and I felt safe to like bring it up. And every time that I feel that I'm like, oh, like, you know, the intersection of being queer and disabled, that's not represented. It is. Like Marsha P. Johnson, a lot of people talk about her being like a Black trans woman. She was also disabled. And that was
I just learned this.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
So we've been here for a really, really long time, but it's nice to be able to have an organization as large as Vancouver Pride kind of talk the talk and walk the walk. They're listening to everything that needs to be done to make Pride a place where like disabled people feel not just invited. We don't want to be invited. We belong here. We just want to be included.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we'll do
Denton's.
3, 2,
Okay.
1.